currently recording. Okay. And I'm going to share my screen. You should be seeing the virtual machine. Okay, so you should be seeing the virtual machine here. So this is, if you remember, the virtual machine that Mitch created. Last week I gave you the link for this. It's on the calendar website. You can download it from there. Hopefully you've downloaded it already. The password is TOOR, T-O-O-R, and the user I think is ITS362. Okay, so today, as you know, we are switching from the client side to the server side going forward. Although we'll still continue to use HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and anything else that's on the client side. We're going to start today thinking about the server side. As we motivated last week, the main programming language that we're going to focus on is PHP. So Mitch already went ahead and created a folder where we can set up our files. So the way that this workflow is going to work, right, is still, you can see here I have the Firefox, okay, the browser, and then you can you can update the file, you can create the files basically. You can navigate here. You can see the folder that Mitch set up is var ww its362. So you can see here, you'll see where I will create the files in here. Obviously, you can always create other folders. You just have to work through the permissions. And you can, maybe for your term project, you can create a separate folder and all of that. But you just, make sure you do. You have to set that up. But in our example, we have this already set up. So here, if I go to the terminal, I'm going to clear the terminal, and you can see we are in var. So I'm going to create a new folder. Actually, let me do this. I'm going to create a new terminal, right? And so you can see there the terminal. We are logged in as ITS362. The local host is Ubuntu or localhost. And then, you just open a terminal. If you can't find the terminal, you click on all these little dots, and then there it is. Right? So you click on that, that will open up the terminal for this. So now that we are here, you can do ls, right? And we need to go into the file system, right, at the root directory. You can see all the folders are here. Then we can navigate into var, which is this one. Okay. And then you can see I'm there as again, and then you can find ww, 3 W's in there. Right, so www, okay, clear. And you can see now we have the folders HTML and i362. So Mitch created ITS362. And so here, this is what we can use for the setup or for writing our code basically. So now if I do ls, you can see there's a couple of files in here. There's an HTML file. There's a test file, test2, test PHP. All right, so we just have to, with a server, usually you have to do a little bit of sysadmin just to kind of manipulate the permissions of where you can put files. Okay, you can see here, if you go into test2, oops, sorry, you can see there's a couple of files, or there's one file in there, objects.php, so you can always take a look at that file. You can do cat objects.
We don't have a test2 directory.
It's not in there?
No, at least not for me.
I see it.
Yeah, I have it too.
I don't have it.
Interesting.
Are you using the VM, the new VM, the 1804 VM? So let me, just
Yeah, I
so that we're
downloaded
all,
it this morning.
yeah, let me just, give me a second. All right, so yeah, so today, the goal is to get set up, right? So everyone, so if you go share screen, right, and in here, and if you scroll down to, here, course website, and then I added a link somewhere. Yeah, here, 1804. Did you click on this one?
Yeah, that's the one I
That's
downloaded.
the one. Okay, so this should be the VM that you should be using, first of all. So now maybe it's got, I mean, it's the same one, right? So it's probably that you took a wrong turn. So let's go back. All right, so let me close this terminal, right? So let's say you just logged in, you're here in the computer, right? So you have to open up the terminal. There it is. All right, then, find out where you are, ls, right? So I'm just going to do cd, and I'm going to go to the root, and then you can see I'm here. Then cd var, you can see I'm there. There's ww, 3 W's. You can always do pwd to find your path where you are. So cd www clear ls, right? And there's ITS 362. Do you not have that one?
Yeah, I have that.
Okay, you have
I
that.
also have a test_PHP there.
Yeah, so if we go into ITS 362, and then you should have test PHP, correct?
I have that, but not test2.
Okay, so you don't have test 2. That's fine. That's fine, but at least you're here in the folder. So then let's go to test PHP. Oops, sorry. All right, and here you have this file, index.php.
Yep.
Okay, and then you can view it, right? So index, PHP, and you can see all it has is a PHP info file. You see that? All right, and then if we go back, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So I'm here, right? ls-l. If we look at the parameters, we can see the parameters here, right? The permissions for the files, index, and the 2 folders. Okay. So basically, this is where our workspace. Okay, this folder will be our workspace. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put our files here. We just kind of have to get a feel for this. And then because we're on the server, right? So usually, as I said, if you were in the cloud, you would SSH, you could SSH into this, and in the cloud, you'd have permissions to work on here. There's a thing called cPanel. It's kind of a GUI interface. It also gives you access. But either way, so this is the approach. All right, if we go to, obviously, this is easier to handle permissions and issues like that. So if we go, now the next thing that we're going to need to worry about is the browser, right? So the browser here. So for instance, if I do an ITS 362, I do cat index HTML, and you can see my index page says, welcome to your domain, success, the local server block is working. Right? You can see that. And so now we want to access. So basically, localhost is directly connected to ITS 362. So if I just do localhost, so now I guess I should. Yeah. So I want, you open the browser, right? And the browser should open like this. Then you can type localhost, right? Okay. Localhost. Yeah, there it is. I don't know what that was. All right. So if in the URL, just doing an update. So if you type just localhost, right, it takes you to ITS 362 kind of by default. That's the mapping of the domain to the files, right? So usually, if you were doing this again in the internet, what would you need? You would need some kind of a domain, correct? So let's say that you guys want to start your own business and you're going to call it, mybusiness.com. And you got that domain, you have to pay for that. Domains are not cheap, especially .com domains are now, all the words are taken basically, so they can be a little bit expensive. I mean, it can range from $100 a year to a lot more, right? So, but then the cloud provider would give you the DNS entry, and then they would map that to a folder in your server. So basically, what you have to do is you go to the server, you put your files there, and then when somebody types, mybusiness.com, all the DNS resolution happens. That matches to the IP of the server. And then they're going to come to your pages here. Okay, that's why here it works by just doing localhost, because we are running on this same machine. Now, if you let's say had two machines, using VMware, right? You have, let's say, for instance, this VM, and then you also have your physical machine, let's say your Windows. If you wanted to reach this website from the Windows side, what would you type? You would type the IP address of this physical machine, right? So that would also work. So for instance, if config, right? And it's 192.168.18.129. So from the browser, you would type that, and it would kind of resolve to this. But in the internet, it's going to be the domain, obviously. In any case, for our purposes, for your project and for everything, it's fine if we just use localhost. Are there any questions about that, guys?
I don't think so.
Yeah, pretty easy. All right, so once that's set up, then we have in localhost, remember it's mapped to 362, right? So then we can we can access our files in here. And as I said, creating other things within this requires, may require permissions in other places in var www. Usually your website files go in var www. Okay, the browser technically should only have access to, for displaying websites, right? Remember, a server needs to be secure. So in order for a website to a server to stay secure, your web pages should only be located in var www and not in other places, because you don't really want people using the browser to access other parts of your file system. So there's that whole issue. Okay, so now we are here. We are looking at our files. So I have test2, a folder, right? And in this folder, I have a couple of files. Okay. You can see that the owner is root. So right now, the way that the VM is set up, we're going to have to use sudo privileges. Otherwise, every time you type something, it's going to get not recorded, right? So just be mindful of that. So I'm just going to use nano right now, just really quickly. So if I do sudo, remember again, when you guys do this, you can use any editor of your preference. I leave that to you to find your own editor that you find. Try a few ones, right? So I know there's a lot of them out there, and everyone has a preference. So I'd rather not pick one for you. So let's go ahead and think about this a little bit. So I'm going to create this file, right? RC test, or I already created it, I should say. And if I open it, I'm just going to type a password, and you can see I've already started, to run some tests. Okay, so run some tests, so you can see there, for instance. Notice that there's some similarities, right? So I tried to start this in a way that was very similar to what we've been doing all semester. So all semester we've been doing, JavaScript jQuery, kind of where we wrote the HTML and then we embedded the JavaScript. Well, here then you can see I'm kind of doing the same approach. So I have HTML, body, body. And then notice now, this is the PHP part, okay? So if you look, what I did here, just like in JavaScript, we would write in the head section the script tags, right? If you remember, we would write the script tags, open script, close script. Here we also use these different, you know, a set of tags. So you can see now instead we are using this, you know, less than question mark PHP, right, to open, and then to close question mark like that. Okay, so you can see that, you know, that's just a very basic approach. And then all I was doing is I was running echo, and then you can see here, hello world. All right, so that's basically it. That's the page, right? And so I've written something. Remember that as we were talking about PHP, today, today I'm just really going to run a few examples of this, kind of show the workflow. So you can see here, this is the PHP part. Remember that this part runs, but it does not display when you view it on the browser. So technically, all that you would see is this part, right? The hello world part that gets rendered here in the, let's say, the body section. So now I'm going to hit Control X. I'm going to hit yes and enter. And I've updated the file basically. I can, you know, once again, just look at the permissions if I want to. Now, I know that the file is in test2, right? And it's called rc_test1.php. So therefore, I'm going to go to the browser. And you don't type in the browser the path of the file. Instead, you have to type the equivalent URL, but our URL localhost is already mapped to this. So they basically, you know, you type localhost and then it's whatever follows after this /. Okay, so that's going to be, that should be our approach. So in this case, I'm going to go in here, type /test2 underscore, and it was rc test1.php. So if I render the page now, you can see that it gives me the hello world code. And then if you look at and if we look at the source of it, you can see that in the source, if I look at the source of the page, you can see here, I'm gonna, you know, because I technically in the browser, I have the file, right? So I have rc_test1.php. That is the file that I just grabbed from var.ww ITS362 test2, right? So I went to that folder, I grabbed that file, but through the mapping of the URL. But when I run the file, you can see it says hello world. If I view the page source, you can see it actually does not show the PHP. It only shows after the PHP runs whatever it renders as part of the code. Does this make sense, guys? Are there any questions?
No questions. That makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah, it makes sense.
perfect. All right, so that base, I think I'm recording this hopefully. So just if you ever want to get started with it, so it says recording, yeah. So that's the workflow. Okay, that can sometimes be confusing. So certainly you have to pay a little bit more attention to the file system when you're working on the server side. Okay, on the server side. So we've talked, I think last week we talked about PHP. I already motivated a lot of it, I believe. We even may have looked at some code. So today we're just doing examples. So this is how you're going to be doing your homework assignments from now on. Okay, so you'll be doing your homework assignments like this. I will have to download your homework on here on my own and run the files and everything. Okay, so you're not going to send me the VM. Of course, that's too big. You're just still going to send me the files. Definitely send me the reports and so on. All right, so that being said, so that's kind of the workflow that we're gonna try to do. Okay, so now we can go ahead then, let's go back to the, you can navigate a little bit, navigate down. And I'm just gonna continue in this folder since this is where I was. So I have, a couple of files in there. Another thing that you can sometimes do that it's useful is if I open this file, and remember this sudo here, for currently the way the permissions are set, you can always change this on your own if you feel like it. I mean, it's your VM, so you can change it however you want. But the way they are right now, it does require sudo privileges. So if you click on this, another thing you can sometimes do is look at the PHP configuration. Remember that this VM was built for this purpose, so it's got LAMP installed already. So we'll see MySQL should also be set up, I believe. So we'll take a look at that in a second. But another thing that you can do sometimes is when you want to look at the configuration settings of PHP. So that for that you can do, I believe it's info. And so just adding that function. So if I do Control X, Y, and then if we go back to the browser now, and I'm going to get rid of this. And that didn't work. Oh, it's PHP info, sorry. So if I go back to the code, sudo nano, PHP info. All right, updated the file, go back here, refresh, and there it is. So this time, PHP has a built-in function, which you just saw me type in the code, called PHP info. And it just gives you all the information about the current settings of PHP, okay? So it gives you all the information about current settings. So you can take a look at this, things that are available, what version it is. So this, you usually don't have to do anything with this, but for those of you that are curious and just want to learn more, notice the document root is there, right? var www its 362. So all of that has been specified. So you can take a look at this if you would like. All the settings, and PHP does have a lot of settings of things that you can change. But I don't think, curl, it uses curl and everything. I don't think it's necessary to change anything. You can just use it as is. But, as I said, if you're curious, you can take a look at this. All right, so that's basically an example of using PHP info to get more information. Another thing you can see here, here is a document, how to install Linux. So here, so this is LAMP, right? So how to install Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, basically the LAMP stack on Ubuntu 18.04. So if you guys are curious about how this was done because you feel you want to repeat it, you want to just learn how to do that on your own, you can definitely take a look at all of this, right? It's going to have all the settings, and it'll give you a lot more insight into all the details of everything, okay? So that's definitely a good read. If you want to, you can see the document shows how to set up virtual host if you want to have other domains. So like if you wanted to create within this machine, other domains like, not just local host, but, my project or my business in my server, whatever you want to do. Just like pretty much like the CVM has, right? The CVM has these, for the individual labs, it's got their own virtual hosts. So you can set that up, just read through the instructions and follow them. And so on, right? So we just did the example of PHP info, right? So we looked at that one. You can also try it out. And so this should be a good read. If we click on this one, PHP MyAdmin, this link here, you can see it actually opens up the PHP MyAdmin. So this will be what you can use for the database, right? So I believe you guys had said that you've used PHP MyAdmin already. This is how you go into the database MySQL on this server. Obviously, you will need a username and password when you create. So you can take a look at the information here to see what was the default password and username. And then that's where you will go in to create databases, tables, and so on, right? So usually what I will do is I will just, for some of the exercises, not today, but at some point, I will give you a .sql text file that I'll probably load on Brightspace. And then what you need to do, or I might put it on my website just for convenience, so we don't have to log in. And then you will download that query and just run it into the, just run it on the, inside PHP MyAdmin to create some databases and tables. Obviously, for your term project, you will need to create your own database and so on. All right, so that's LAMP. You know, we're on Linux. Apache is running. If you want, you know, Apache is going to be running usually by default. If it wasn't running for whatever reason, you just have to type. If you go to the terminal, you just have to type, you know, sudo. Oops, sudo apt or apt-get install Apache 2, or if it's already installed, you can always do sudo service Apache 2 start, and so on, right? So that's the approach. So that's Linux, Apache, MySQL. As I said, you know, it's basically a service. You can always just click. Don't lose this link, but you can see there localhost local. You can see it there, localhost PHP MyAdmin should be the URL that takes you to configure the database. So that's the M part of LAMP. And then the P part is, of course, PHP, which we just saw PHP info a second ago. All right, so that's basically the workflow of this and how it's gonna work. So now what we're gonna do is just we're gonna try out a few little examples just to kind of get a better feel for PHP. So I can, I'm gonna just go here, right? And then localhost again. All right, you have that. So now we can scroll down to, you know, let's go to the terminal here. And I'm just gonna continue I'm gonna continue here in this path, right? So if I do pwd, so in var ww its 362 test 2, right? And again, you know, given that we have this, I'm gonna do sudo nano, and I'm gonna create a new file, right? So let's try that. So I'm gonna call it variable, you know, string something. Just something simple, PHP. All right, so we're using, notice we are now using the extension PHP. So your projects now will have files that have files with extensions .html, .css, .js, .php. All right, and that starts to get us into the idea of model view control, of the separation of the files based on what they do. So we'll get into that. But for now, since I'm writing very small files, just to kind of illustrate some of the aspects of PHP, I'm not really going to break them up into individual files. I'm just going to have single files. So let's, you know, remember the sudo for the Otherwise, it's going to become irritating when you type something and it won't save. So I do this, and now notice I'm going to just create the basic HTML code first. Right, I have my HTML code there. Then, just somewhere in the body for now, you can, just where I want to render my code. So that's the body section, right? And so I want this to appear in the body. So I'm going to use the PHP tag. So I'm just going to say PHP and then question mark like that. And then in here, I'm going to type, just try something else. So, we saw in the slides last week that, if we wanted to create a variable, we can use the $, for instance. And then now I'm going to take 2 words, let's say John, and I'm going to try to concatenate this. I'm going to do dot and Doe. John Doe. Okay. And once I've now, yeah, so let's try that for now. And then what I want to do then is I'm just going to echo. So notice echo. You can use echo actually to debug in a very similar way that you use in JavaScript the alert. So in JavaScript, you might do alert this just to see what the value is to get some feedback. Well, here the same applies. With the echo, this just prints out something to the terminal, or sorry, to the website. And so this might be a good way to debug if you'd like that. Then in here we can say my name is, and then we can notice here we can plug in the variable within the double quotes because it's got the $. So I'm going to do name. All right, and I've got basically these 2 statements. So now I can try this. I'm going to do Control X, Y, enter. Right, and this is called variable string. So I'm going to go to the browser and in test 2, I think is where I was. Right, so that was the RC. So now I said variable string. Variable string. And there it is, right? So there's your page. If I do right click on this, remember, I don't see the PHP. I only see what PHP rendered, which was basically the string. My name is John Doe, and then that becomes displayed, so you can see this works here on the browser. So my name is John Doe. So obviously we can correct that a little bit. But that's the basic workflow. Obviously, you can do a lot more complicated things than just this, but this at least gets us in the workflow of our project. So as you know, so the plan with PHP at least will be to do some basic exercises first. Then do some exercises dealing with the get and post arrays, which allow us to send data. Because remember that, you're going to have, on the client side, you're going to have basically HTML files. You might think you're calling a PHP file from a server, but remember that PHP code only runs on the server, renders an output, which is all HTML, sends that to the client. The client then looks at that file, does whatever clicking is necessary, maybe on a form, then clicks a button. That data gets sent back to the server, possibly to another PHP file, but on the server itself. So to accomplish that, we are going to, if we're using forms, that means we're going to be using actions like, get and post. And therefore, we have to deal with those on PHP. So that will be kind of the, a progression. Then after we have completed that, we'll probably get into the database, incorporating the database. Remember there, I'm not really going to focus on teaching anything related to SQL, I'm really just going to focus on making the, the connection to the database, running a query, and then getting results back and printing them out. That's sort of the focus. And then after that, after dealing with databases, we will probably then be ready for MVC because we'll have more experience with it. So we'll do the model view control approach where I'll actually start laying out a project with the files all broken up. And then finally, we'll build a project that includes logins, right? So logins, username and password logins via database authentication. And so that you can have then a simple application. So at the end of the semester, hopefully we'll have an application that has a simple menu for navigation and, that where you're logged in or logged out. So that will be the focus. All right, so we just talked about, we did an example, variable string, so that one's done. You don't have to submit these for homework. Remember, you only have to do, there will be a homework assignment. As you might guess, probably, right, you're going to do a grade calculator, but this time around, on the server side, so using PHP. All right, so let's try something else that's just something simple. We're going to try so we are going to try so let's try just something, array, loops basically, and arrays all at once. So we're going to create a new file. So let's go back to, as you can see here, we are back at the terminal. And on the terminal here, then let's do a new file. So sudo, I'm going to do ls-l, right? I'm going to do sudo nano. And now I'm going to create, let's just say arrays. Something arrays.php. This will include loops as well. All right, and once again, our workflow, do the HTML. Because remember, we still need to have an HTML data, right? PHP, ultimately, all it does is it constructs an HTML page. So then in here, we're going to do body. Okay, and body again. All right, and then on here, then we can now set up our PHP code. So I'm going to do this, PHP. Okay, and so, we saw last week when we looked at the slides, we saw, arrays, we saw for loops. And so now I'm going to do the same. I'm going to create, something colors, let's say. It's a colors array. Okay, colors array. And it's going to be one of those of the examples that we saw, the example that had key value pairs. Okay, so we're going to do, let's say, red. And notice that it uses something like this instead of a comma, which is, so here, for instance, we can just define some parameters. So just to be consistent, I'm going to set up like colors. So I'm going to say FF and then 4 zeros. Okay. And then that's one entry. Then I'm going to do another entry. Let's say green. So green, and I'm going to use another. These don't really matter, but so I'm going to do 0, 0. FF 0, 0. Okay. And you can have, however many you want. So in this case, maybe another one. I'm gonna do blue. And then like that. And I think I'm missing a double quote here. Okay, and in here, I'm just gonna say 4 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then FF. Okay, so now I'm gonna add the semicolon here, and that's basically my entry for the array. Now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to basically just iterate through this array and print out the value. So in this case, we can use something called a for each. And then if you remember also from the slides, we're gonna do for each $ colors as $ name name and the code, right? So the name and the code, like that. Okay, so here again, as is common in most programming languages, we used curly brackets, so we can, take this approach, right? And within this code, then we just want to print this out, so we can use echo. Oops. We can use echo. Use echo, and we can do name dot, add something like colon space, just so it looks more presentable. Then concatenate again, as we saw. Concatenate the code, leave a space. And then after that, dot, or let's just leave it there for now. All right, so let's see what happens. So I'm going to try to run this code, and basically it should print all three names and codes. So I'm going to hit Control X, Y, enter.
I believe you have an extra quotation mark on
Did
your
I?
colors,
Extra quotation.
or your color at the very end. The color, not the colors.
Where?
It's at the very end. You can't see it right now.
Oh, at the very end of this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Oh, you're right. Okay, so I do have. Okay, thank you. And then, so let me just add this back. All right, and then here, this actually, if this is called colors, so this is colors, right? Because we're referencing it here. Okay, so now, hopefully, if this works, it'll print out. So the name is array, so I'm gonna do Control X, Y, enter. All right, I'm gonna go back to the browser. And I know where I am, localhost test 2, same place. I just have to, in theory, just change this. So I'm going to do arrays. And there you go. You see it printed out, red in its color, green in its color, blue in its color. It doesn't look great, but at least it did iterate through the array. If you look at the page source again, notice it just renders, PHP is not there. It just renders the output. So what we want to do is really probably add like a new line character in the browser, right? We do that in HTML with a break line, a BR tag. And so we want to go back to the file. And how could we do that? Well, probably the best way is to mix PHP with HTML. So to do that, we can just try dot concatenate, and now we concatenate a tag, because remember that this tag will literally appear in the file right there, so the browser can just interpret it. All right, so in this case, I'm going to do break line like that, and you can see now every time I add the name in the code, I would also get a new line character. So let's go ahead and try that. Control X, Y, enter. We go back to our browser, and I'm gonna do refresh, and there you go. You see that now we are able to mix in the things that we already know about HTML in PHP. So PHP just runs on the server, and it provides this logic. If you look at the page source, you can see, although it was generated dynamically, it should be there, the break lines. Okay, or actually, I refresh. There they are. All right, so you can see that the BR tags have actually been added because it's fixed HTML code, so that is to be expected. And that's it. So you can see here, if we go back to our code now, we can see that, again, do a clear here. We have some files now. You can see how it's starting to fill up with files, and that's one of the issues. PHP is a scripting language, so really these scripts can accumulate, right? Can accumulate, and that's why you end up with so many files, and that's why model view control approaches like that are useful to better organize your information. All right, so let's continue then. So let's try the other example of the iterator. So the iterator, it's another way of doing things. So we're going to go back to the terminal, right? And we can start file again. Go back after the for each. Okay, down here. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to do an echo. Right, I'm going to do an echo. And this time, now another way that you can try doing an echo is like this. So there's another. So you can also try that, see if that works for you. So here, let's add this line. So add that. All right, and oops, sorry. And then now use that iterator object. So I'm going to create a variable iterator, and it's going to be a new, just like we saw in the slides, array iterator, right? It's going to be created with respect to the colors array, right? So we have colors, and then here now we can try a while loop. So this is sometimes the following logic is actually consistent with how you deal with databases. All right, so that's why I am showing this, because later on when we look at databases, you will see a similar structure in the way that we download the records and then we iterate through them line by line. So for instance, here I'm going to do a while loop that just says iterator valid. So you kind of check, notice that it uses a lot of arrows instead of dots. So you're going to say if valid, basically it means if I can still continue to iterate, right? So if I can still continue to iterate, then I'm going to do something. So in this case, we can do the curly brackets. curly brackets there. And now we're just going to, try something else, right? So we want to, let's try the function print. So I want to print something, and I'm going to do iterator. And remember that this has keys and values, so I can grab then key, for instance, right? So I can just grab a key, and let's see what prints out when I do this. I'm going to add the BR tags just so that, so that we have something that's a little bit more presentable and easier to read. I'm going to add the semicolon, and then you have to add this iterator next to kind of force it to move. So I'm going to do iterator next, like that, semicolon. All right, so now we would have two ways of iterating through the array. So let's go ahead and try that. So I'm going to do control. This is still arrays. Control X, Y, enter. I'm going to go to the browser, Firefox. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the page, and there it is. So now I have a new line, a line rule or HR rule. So to separate the data, and then here I printed out red, green, and blue. Those are the keys, right? So it allows me to iterate through the keys. The next thing we can try is iterator has a function, function method called current. All right, so hopefully to get the value. So then I'm going to go back to the browser, to the terminal here, open up sudo nano arrays, and then I'm just going to, play with this a little bit more. So now I'm going to say, well, I also want to concatenate, obviously a space, colon space, so I can separate the key from the value. And then here I have another dot. And so in between these dots, I have to figure out what should go. So I'm going to do iterator, like that. And I'm going to say current. Okay, so now I'm going to print out key and current, and separated by a colon, and there's a break line at the end. So basically that's all I did. So I'm going to do control X, Y, enter. Go back to the browser, fresh, and there you go. And that's basically it. So as you can see, we've done a couple of examples. This is really, for lack of a better word, the workflow that you're going to follow when you're using your PHP or server side. Make sense, guys?
Yeah, makes sense.
So current is for getting the value?
That's right. Current is a built-in method. It was a built-in method of the iterator that was getting the value. So if you notice, for us to use name and code, we had to actually tell it that in the for each, right? So in the for each, we gave it colors, but the colors did not really have a property.
Professor, you sound kind of, your microphone sounds kind of off.
Is it failing again?
Yes.
How about now?
Way better.
This sounds
Clean
better.
as a whistle.
Much better?
Yeah, you're normal now.
Okay, thank you. I don't know. I mean, I honestly. Okay, so. All right, so we're back. Then so recording volume. Okay, so let me switch back to the to the computer. So this is the PHP. So we were talking, yeah, so we were talking about the array, how colors does not really have a property called name and code, right? We just assume these are key value pairs because that's what we always call them. But we have to actually provide those names here. So we do name and code. We kind of imply it. Down here, though, the current is actually different because it is a built-in function of iterator. And the key is also a built-in. So that's really the only difference. But this allows us to get the key. This allows us to get the value, as we saw in the previous code. So if I do Control X, save, and then I run this again, as you can see, we've got our data. And that's it. So that's a couple of examples. You can use whichever loop you want. Again, the reason why I always show the iterator one is because you will see when we get to the databases part of PHP that there's a similarity in how we can do that. Okay, so that is that one. So now we're gonna do something. So that's really the basic things, right? So we did the simple things. Now what we're gonna try to do is, so let me think. So let's now try to communicate between two pages. Okay, we're going to try to communicate between two pages. So let's try to do that. Yeah. All right. So this will be a little bit more complex. Okay, guys. So obviously we don't want to just do these simple things. What we want with PHP is to be able to do more logic, much more complex logic. So in this example, I'm going to actually need, let's say like almost three files. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to create two files. Let's say I'm just to simplify it, I'm going to create two files. One is going to be an HTML file, pure HTML, basically. It's going to have a form, a couple of text boxes. We fill in the values. And then we're going to send. So we're assuming that we would be running that file on the client side, right? So you're somewhere, in your home, you download an HTML page, you click on it. That's the client side. Then you're going to send the data to the server. And on the server, you're going to have a file, another file, a PHP file waiting to process that data. Okay, so that will be the approach that we're going to take. So this can be done in several ways. We're just going to do this in one way right now to kind of start to get a feel for this. This is an important aspect that is going to be repeated throughout the semester. So it's certainly very useful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with the first file. I'm going to try to give all of these similar names. So I'm going to call this one function .htm, right? So that's, and of course I have to do sudo nano function. So I've got my file here. I'm just going to do HTML and HTML here. And then I'm going to do the head section here, just to kind of have this be a little bit more complete, right? So the head section, and then here we can say, right, something like title, and then, this is my function .htm. title file. Right? Just like that. All right, and then in the next section, we're going to proceed to create, in the body, we're going to add a form, basically. Just a regular form from HTML. So I'm going to do body here, body, and then in the body section, I'm going to create, let's say, this is an example. Okay, so that's example here. And then now a form. So remember, you can use the form tags, just like that, in HTML. And of course, now that we use a form, we need to specify a few parameters for the form. But before I do that, I'm gonna just, what do I want in this form? So basically, let's say something like product ID. And then I'm gonna have, let's say a text box, so something like an input type equal text, just like that. So, and then I'm gonna obviously, usually give it let's say a name in this case, or an ID. So I'm gonna say name product ID. Product ID. So, and then I'm going to close it. And I'm going to add a break line so I don't, so just for better presentation, add a break line. All right, then I'm going to do the same for a product name. So I'm going to do product name. I'm going to do the same thing, input. I'm going to use a text type. I'm going to give it a name, product name in this case. Product name. And I'm going to add my break line tag as well, just like that. So I have a typo there. All right, and then on here, then let's add another break line for presentation. And finally, we need to have a button, right? So we need to have some kind of a button. Type equals submit. And then just give it a value. Send. We give it the value send. And let's just add another. All right, so that's our form. The only thing that's missing, though, is that we need to tell the form what to do. Right, so basically we're going to say, the action of the form is going to be what? We want it to go online to the server, right? So we're going to say then here, we would need to specify, if this was over the internet, right? So the actual place that we want to go to. But in this case, we can just say, because we're on the local host, in the current working directory, just look up function.php. Okay, and then now we're going to say, that's the action to take. So we want to find, obviously I haven't created this file yet, but I have to create it. So basically when I hit the button, it'll go to this file and it will use the method get. So remember, we can use either get or post. Get just passes the values on the query string itself on the URL. So it's usually it'll have like the little question mark and then, you know, product ID equals so-and-so, you know, ampersand, product name equals so-and-so. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so we've written this form. So now I'm going to hit Control X, Y, enter. If I do ls-l, there's my file, function, HTML. Now I could probably open that file right now. In fact, I can. So if I go to the browser, I'm just going to say function.htm, and there it is. So I have, you know, my file, you know, I got it from the server, right? But it's an HTML file, no PHP ran, and so it was just sent to my browser. If you know, the idea will be product ID, so you want, you know, 001, product name, you know, hammer, and then you would hit enter. And notice that when you hit enter, what happened was it tried to go somewhere, right? So it went, it looked for function.php. It passed the parameters product ID because we're using a get method, right? So you can see here in the URL, product ID equals 001 and product name equal hammer. All right, so usually when you use post, then these values are not displayed on the URL. They would be sent in a little file. And if you're, you know, if you're encrypted, you know, nobody can obviously look at the information. So now that we've done this one, let's think about function PHP, right? Because everything worked just fine. It tried to go to function PHP. The problem is it's not found because it does not exist. So now we have to go ahead and try that. So I'm going to go here. So I'm going to go here, and now I'm going to try to create a new file called function PHP. So that's the next step in the process. So I'm going to, you know, again, sudo nano function. Remember, the previous one was function.htm. This one is function.php. That makes them completely different. So now I'm going to, again, what is function PHP? Well, if you notice in the browser, it's supposed to be a website, right? It's supposed to generate, you know, render some web content and do some processing of those two variables. So what we need to do is I'm going to do HTML here, HTML, and then I'm going to go into the head section, right? And now I'm going to generate here the title, like that. And just this is, you know, function.php, just to illustrate that. Okay. Now, in the body section, though, that's where I want to do some rendering of information. Now it's the logic part, right? So I want to do some logic. So I'm going to do body. And, you know, let's add a heading. So I'm going to say name value pairs, process, name, you know, product ID and value, for instance. Okay, so we're just going to try that. So I do this. Now on here, I'm going to, you know, PHP. And this is where we have now our PHP code. Okay, this is where we have our PHP code. So what are the things that we need to do? We need to let's just do this simply. So the first thing is there are several arrays built in into PHP. There's several, not just these two. Post, oops, they're uppercase, it's case sensitive. So post. There's another one also called server. For the most part, we will be using getter post, but in this example, we'll take a look at you know, how to use server. So let's just do that one. So let's say whenever you so think of the way this works, right? So think of the way it works. When you go, you're on this page somewhere in, you know, California. You click on this. This takes you to the Chicago server where this function is located, right? And basically that whole event of sending that information, you can think of it as an object. All right, so in that object then, the server in PHP has information about that event that it just received, okay? And so for this particular page, so the first thing we want to try is, well, let's see what information we could get from server. So for instance, I can create a variable method, right, just to know if this was a get or a post, okay? So method, then I'm going to take that value from server. From server, and server actually possesses a lot of values. Think of it as an array, the get, post, or server arrays. So then we can retrieve a value from here. Okay, we can retrieve a value. So in this case, I should show how to create a comment. So here I'm going to say, you know, this is a comment. So retrieve the HTTP method. Okay, so in this case, the getter or the post. So therefore, this would be request method. Okay, request method. So I'm going to do request method, just like that. Do you guys see that? And once I have my request method, it should be get basically. So I want to print it out. So I'm going to print out echo. I'm going to do echo, and I'm going to say the HTTP method is, and then I can just plug in method in here. So I can do method. Okay. I can also in here, notice, put in the break line. So I can do oops, like that. All right. And this allows me to display the information. So in this case, just that method. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. So I need to save the file, Control X, Y, Enter. Right? If I do clear on here and then ls-l, you can see now that I have all these files. Right? I have all these files. These are the two in question, function HTML and function PHP. So I'm going to go ahead and go back. So now in theory, this should work, right? So I'm going to hit, change this to nails, hit send, and there you go. This time around, I went to the function PHP, but it now does exist, okay? It now does exist, and the HTTP method is get, which basically matches to the what I had in form. So if I look at the function.htm file, you can see on here in the form line that it does say get. Any questions?
I don't think so.
Nope. All right, so that is now, you know, the function PHP, but we probably want to do more with it. We want to process those two text box values, right? So we want to process the values in the text box. So let's go ahead and do that. So how do we do that? We want now before we use get, I guess there's another way that we can retrieve the name value pairs from the request, and that is through yet another. Usually we'll just use get and post, but given that here I'm just showing different arrays, we're going to try another one. This is called the request array. The request array. Okay, and so we can store it's an array, right? So we can create our own array. We can try to create our own array, you know, $name values. Let's create that array. And then we're just going to assign the contents of request into this array. Okay, so I'm just going to do $name values, and I assign to it the contents. So really the hammer and the ID should be in there. And now what I want to do is I need to display that content. Okay, I'm going to try to display that content. So I have to think about how to do that. Okay. So obviously what you could do is you could write the function just like we did in one of the previous examples of how to iterate through the array. However, PHP is all about scripting and about keeping things simple. So in fact, what you can do sometimes is that if you have a function, let's say that, you know, I'm going to create a function and the function would take an array and display the contents of the array. And then let's also think that that function will not just be used by this page, but would be used by 20 or 30 other pages of your website, right? If it's going to be used by many other pages, instead of writing that function 20 times in 20 different files, it might be better just to write it once in a file, a separate file, and then just kind of import it into all these files, okay? That's a very common approach in both MVC and PHP, all right? So this is kind of your first introduction to that idea. So what that means is that I want to make this code less convoluted, right? And so I'm just going to assume there is a function. So it's just called display. And what do I display? I'm going to display what's in name value. So I'm going to do name values here. And I'm just going to display that, right? But the problem is, where is this defined? So that's going to be defined in yet another file. And that other file is called, you know, whatever I want it to be called. So I'm going to call it display function.php. It's going to be in there. So the only thing I have to do is I have to include that file in this code where I want it to appear. So I'm going to add a comment here, and I'm just going to say include the display function definition. Okay, remember, why do we do this? So that, again, if I had 20, 30 other pages that are going to use this function, instead of writing it 20, 30 times, I just write it once. Imagine if you work for like a web development, right? And somebody says, you know, the owners or whatever, the client says, I want to change that function that you had created to this. And the website's really large. It has 100 pages, and 95 of the pages actually use that function. Can you imagine the amount of work you have to do? You have to sit down and you have to open one file and change it. And then you have to open the other file and change it. And you'd have to do that 90 times. And think about all the hours you're going to put in, plus the fact that when you're doing this, you might get distracted, you might get tired, and in one of those 90 pages, you made a mistake and you left a typo. You see what I'm saying? So that's when now MVC, model view control, starts to appear as a mechanism for writing more efficient code. Okay, guys? So that's an important. So you're going to find that in PHP, you have these built-in functions either called require once, like that, right? And require once basically means that if the file is not imported, it's going to give you an error, all right? That's why it's called require, as in required. There's another one called, which is the one we're going to use here, called include once. This one will not give you an error. Obviously, the code will not function properly, but it shouldn't give you an error. So that's really the difference. But what we do here then is I'm going to say include once, right? And I just need to include the path or the file that I want. So for instance, the definition of this function display is going to be in another PHP file that I have yet to create. So I'm just going to call it display function .php. You see that? And that's all I have to do. So now the logic of my code is basically I load display function PHP. That gives me the definition of the display function. I created an array. I went to the server variable and I got the request method, which was get. I printed it. Then I assign also from another variable request the name values. Assigned it to my array. That's going to include the whatever I have in the get. And then I take name values. I'm going to iterate through it and display it. So that's really all it is, right? So now the only thing that's left for this hopefully to work is that we need to create the display function and provide its properties. So we're going to go ahead and do that part. So I'm going to hit Control X, Y, Enter. And I'm going to do a clear here, ls-l. You can see the functions are there. So now, sudo nano, and then I'm going to create display function PHP because that is the name that we define. So display function.php. Remember, it's a script, so it's going to and notice that the great thing about this is that this is very much MVC, model view control, because here in this file we will have no HTML. There's absolutely no HTML that is necessary. Okay. Instead, in this one is a purely PHP logic file. You can see that there, PHP, like that. You see, no HTML. And the way to think about it is that when you do that include, you're basically grabbing all of this, copying it, and pasting it in the place where the include would appear. So in a sense, that's all it's doing. It grabs this code, it kind of like places it there. But where in the exact place where you define the include, you can think of it that way. But it just makes for your code to be a lot more easy to manipulate because, as I said, you don't have, if you ever have to change this display function, you only do it once instead of having to do it 95 times in 95 different files. So now I'm going to proceed to define so this file contains only the definition of the display function. So I'm just going to say here, oops, display function. So I'm going to do the display function, and this is going to be function display. And remember, it takes an array, so it does, names. What was it? Name values. It doesn't have to match, but you know. So name values here. You just have to provide a proper definition. So open curly bracket, close curly bracket, and that's it, right? You know, at this point, you've defined you have the function in there. Now you just need the definition. So we can use the code from the previous example for each, and then $sign name values as, and then we can get iterate through name value, right? So I can say name, name and value, just like that. Then in here, I can also do my open curly bracket, close curly bracket. And then in here, now I'm going to echo. So I echo name, and then I'm going to concatenate. And I'm going to do value. And of course the break lines so that it looks better. Just like that. All right, and that is it. Hopefully, if all of this works, notice how, you know, in this example, we've covered a lot actually. Notice this one is pure PHP logic. So now Control X, Y, this script, we do ls-l. Now we have our three scripts to do something, right? To do something. And this is, as I've said a couple of times, your first example really of MVC and the ideas behind MVC. All right, so now let's try it out. So we need to go to the browser. And I'm going to go here. I'm going to refresh the page. So I'm going to hit send. And you can see it'll work, right? Because I went, before I was just printing the get. Now it prints product ID was 01, product name is nails. I go back and I'm going to change this to product 4, and I'm going to say paint. I'm going to say 004 and paint, send it, get method 004 paint. And that's it. So if you, like when you do your homework calculator, for instance, you're going to have, you know, the form, you can think of it as where the grades would be, right? Where the grades would be. And you can do that with, you know, all the things that you learn about jQuery would be there. That's the presentation side. Then when you hit on the enter button, it will do all the calculations, right? And then it'll display this. Now, you don't have to have two separate pages. You can actually just have one single page where you can have the form. When it loads, it's just a form, but then it's going to check, has somebody submitted a request? So if a request has been submitted, it doesn't just show the form, it does the processing and it outputs the data. So we will see an example of how to do that later, but today, you know, this just kind of illustrates the basic logic of what we're doing here. Okay. All right. So are there any questions at this time, guys?
None for me, at least.
Making sense?
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
Yeah. All right. So this is the code. We will continue doing more examples in the days to come. Okay. So that's really, now this, do we have a homework assignment due this this Wednesday?
Yeah, I believe so. I think it's the jQuery UI homework.
jQuery UI. Okay. All right. So on Wednesday, if you have any questions on jQuery UI, you know, we will work through those in the lab. Otherwise, for those of you that may have finished the jQuery UI already and are ready to start a new homework assignment, again, make sure you have the VM practice these exercises. Okay, I'm going to go to the GitHub now. So let me just stop sharing this. So let's go to the GitHub. 362. It's this one. We're going to go to content. All right, and if we click on table of contents, so you can see jQuery UI. Let's do this week. Here is the LAMP. You know, obviously this is just read through this if you'd like, but you know, basically the VM is created. So you can skip this if you'd like. It's just there. And then you can see here, this is what we started last week. So we went over, I believe, all these slides last week. And then here is the new homework assignment. So as you can see, we don't have that many homework assignments left in the semester. And that's really because you will start, you have 3, I guess. You will start working on your term project, which we've started to talk about that. So let me click on this. All right, and you can see this is the first homework related to PHP. So it's the grade calculator. So the goal of this will be to get familiar with server-side scripting techniques with PHP, to learn to write web applications with PHP. This will be a redo of the previous lab 6 with PHP. So refer back to that lab for the way that it should behave. There shall be a single PHP page in this lab assignment. So this I still have to show you. If you notice today, we did 2 pages, but later on I will show you how to do this in 1 page. So in other words, when you have 1 page, the grade entry part and the calculated grade should all be on the same page. Then please make sure that your PHP page maintains all the values entered previously. That is, if grades for 5 labs were entered, after calculating the course grade using the same PHP page, the previously entered 5 lab grade should be displayed properly. Okay, and then you will zip everything and submit it to me, just the files, not the VM. All right, so that will be the lab, you know, for those of you that may be ready. The next example, it's, you know, the next example is similar to the one we just did. It's a long one, so I don't want to break it up into parts and start it today. So this will be a good stopping point for today. So if you guys have any questions, just stay over. Let me stop the recording.